Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. And today we're going to be looking at something a little different.
Oh.
Yeah, we're going to be looking at Booktube.
Booktube.
Yeah, so for those who might not know, Booktube is a community on YouTube of people who love books and they make videos about books.
Sounds interesting.
Yeah, and there's actually a lot more to it than you might think.
I can imagine.
Yeah, and actually there's a lot of controversy around Booktube.
Really?
Yeah, so that's what this deep dive is all about. We're going to be taking a look at some of the criticisms and controversies that have been swirling around this corner of YouTube.
I'm intrigued. Where are we going to be getting all of this information from?
Right, so the sources that we're going to be looking at for this deep dive are two videos from a channel called the Unwanted Book Club.
Okay.
And the videos are titled Booktube is Problematic, Part 1 and Part 2.
Okay, so it sounds like we're going to be getting a pretty critical take on this community.
Yeah, they definitely don't hold back in their critique. They really delve into some of the darker aspects of Booktube.
I'm ready to lay it on me. What kind of controversies are we talking about here?
Well, you know, just your typical accusations of fake readers, heated debates about cancel culture, and that age-old question of, can you really separate the art from the artist?
Sounds like there's a lot to unpack there.
There is a lot to unpack.
So where do we start? Where do these videos begin their critique?
Well, one of the first things they tackle is this idea that Booktube has become overly focused on consumerism.
Consumerism.
Yeah, you see all these massive book hauls.
Yeah.
You know, people showing off their giant TBR piles.
Yeah.
It all feels very focused on acquiring the next big book rather than actually, sitting down and reading.
I see. So it's more about the image of being a reader than the act of reading itself.
Yeah, and the videos actually give this example of booktubers attending conventions, not necessarily to engage in literary discussions, but to snag those coveted advanced reader copies, the ARCs,
Right.
and pose for photos.
So it becomes about the performance of being a reader rather than the genuine experience.
Exactly, and they actually quote one YouTuber who admitted that their overflowing bookshelves were more for show and didn't really reflect their actual reading taste.
Oh, wow. So it's like books are becoming props in this carefully curated online persona.
Exactly, and it makes you wonder, is this really about a love of books or is it something else entirely?
It's a good question, and one that I think a lot of online communities are grappling with.
For sure. And speaking of grappling, where this whole image obsession really gets interesting.
Where?
The whole fake reader girls controversy.
Oh, yeah. I vaguely remember that. Wasn't that a while back?
Yeah, a few years ago, YouTuber Steve Donahue posted this video, and it basically accused some booktubers of not being real readers.
What did he mean by that?
Well, he claimed that they were more focused on appearances on promoting books than actually genuinely engaging with them.
That's an interesting claim.
Yeah, and he even coined the hashtag faker reader girl.
Oh, I remember that now. It caused quite a stir, didn't it?
Yeah, it did not go over well with a lot of booktubers.
It's a pretty provocative accusation. It makes you wonder what his intentions were. Was he simply trying to point out a valid concern about the performative nature of online spaces, or was it a way to kind of dismiss the genuine passion of many booktubers?
Right, and how booktubers responded to that accusation is really interesting.
How so?
Well, many of them responded defensively, highlighting the number of books they read.
Oh, so it's like quantity over quality.
Yeah, it's like they were trying to prove their authenticity by showing how much they read.
Which almost plays into his critique, doesn't it? Like reading is now being measured by these external metrics rather than the personal, internal experience.
Right, exactly. So to give you an idea of how some booktubers reacted, I've actually got a clip here from one of the reaction videos.
Oh, let's hear it.
And as you're listening, pay attention to the emotion in her voice. You can really hear how personal this attack felt to her.
Okay.
You can really hear how hurt she is by this accusation.
It makes you think about how closely we tie our identities to what we read and how we engage with the books.
Yeah, it's like being accused of faking your passion for something you truly love.
Absolutely. And this leads us to another big issue, that these videos address cancel culture on Booktube.
Right, this idea that there's a tendency within this community to cancel authors and their books for various reasons.
So what are some of the reasons why authors might get canceled on Booktube?
Well, it could be anything from problematic themes in their writing to controversial opinions they've expressed personally.
Oh, wow. So it kind of blurs the line between what they're writing and who they are as a person.
Exactly. And the videos cite the J.K. Rowling controversy as a prime example.
Right, because her views on transgender individuals have sparked so much debate and division.
Yeah, and you see this playing out on Booktube with some people advocating for a complete boycott of her work while others are defending her right to free speech.
It's a tough situation because it forces us to confront this question of, can we or should we separate the art from the artist, especially when the artist holds views or has engaged in behaviors that we find reprehensible.
Right, and that's something that these videos really dig into, this whole idea of separating art from the artist.
It's a debate that extends far beyond Booktube. It's something that we grapple with in all forms of of art.
For sure. And these videos argue that Booktube really struggles with this separation.
In what way?
Well, they claim that there's a tendency to judge authors personally, sometimes leading to boycotts and a reluctance to even engage with their work.
It's interesting because on one hand, you want to acknowledge the potential harm that an artist's actions or views might have caused, but on the other hand, can we truly appreciate a work of art without considering its creator?
Yeah, it's a complex issue, and it's one that these videos explore through several examples, like H.P. Lovecraft. Yeah, his work is undeniably brilliant, but it's also very much tinged with his deeply racist views.
Right. It's a tough one because his work is so influential, but his views are so abhorrent.
Exactly. And then they also bring up Orson Scott Card, who's faced a lot of criticism for his homophobic statements.
It's like these are classic examples that force us to really grapple with these difficult questions. The complexities of art appreciation and ethical consideration.
Right. And it makes you wonder, what impact does this culture of critique and cancellation have on writers themselves? Do they feel pressure to self-censor or to conform to certain expectations to avoid being canceled?
It's a valid concern, especially for writers who are just starting out and trying to find their voice.
And the videos suggest that this environment, this Booktube environment, might actually be stifling creativity and leading authors to avoid expressing potentially controversial ideas.
This online community is almost a microcosm of these anxieties and tensions that we see playing out in society as a whole.
Right. It's like a reflection of our current cultural moment.
Exactly. And this leads us to an interesting comparison, that the videos make the world of AuthorTube.
AuthorTube.
Yeah, so these are YouTube channels that are run by authors themselves.
Oh, okay. So instead of reviewing other people's books, they're talking about their own work.
Exactly. And the videos suggest that AuthorTube feels more genuine and less driven by drama.
Why do you think that is?
Well, maybe it's because the goals and incentives are fundamentally different. Booktubers are reviewing and reacting to works created by others, whereas authors on AuthorTube are sharing their own creative processes and engaging directly with readers.
So maybe those different roles kind of shape the tone and the dynamics of these online communities.
That's what I'm thinking. And speaking of broader context, the videos also touch upon the historical context of book banning and censorship.
Oh, that's right. They bring up examples of, historical book burnings and bans.
Yeah, to illustrate that these attempts to control thought and expression through books, they're nothing new.
It's a good reminder that the freedom we have to read and think and express ourselves is not something we should take for granted.
Exactly. And understanding this history of censorship can help us recognize the dangers of restricting access to ideas, even those that we might find offensive or disagree with.
Right. It's about protecting that freedom of expression, even when we might not agree with what's being expressed.
And that's a principle that I think is really important to uphold.
Absolutely. So we've got all these concerns, the superficiality, the cancel culture, the struggle to separate art from the artist, the potential impact on writers. And this is all happening within this larger historical context of censorship.
It's a lot to think about.
Yeah, it's a lot. And what makes it even more complex is the fact that this is all playing out on a platform like YouTube, which is driven by algorithms and this constant need to generate views.
Right. And that pressure to create content that goes viral, that gets clicked, it can definitely influence the types of conversations that are happening online.
It can skew things for sure.
Yeah.
So I think it's worth exploring how this pressure to create content might be warping the landscape of Booktube.
I agree. Let's dive into that. It's a weird thing, isn't it? Because they want genuine connection, right? But the platform itself almost pushes them in the opposite direction.
It's like this popularity contest, where the loudest and most controversial voices tend to get the most attention.
And the videos definitely call that out, the drama and negativity that can sometimes overshadow any real discussion about the books.
Yeah, they make it seem like it's a community that loves to judge and jump on bandwagons and, turn small disagreements into these huge blowups.
I mean, part of that has to be because of how YouTube works, right? The algorithm and all that.
Oh, absolutely. The need to create content that grabs people's attention, it's got to be feeding into all the drama.
You click on one video about a Booktube feud, and then your recommendations are full of them.
Exactly. And some of the examples that they give in the videos are pretty embarrassing. Like these little arguments over reading preferences or these big online fights that seem to have nothing to do with books at all.
It's fine to disagree, about a book or an author, but when it gets personal and people start attacking each other online, it just...
And as someone who enjoys Booktube, I have to admit it can be a bit of a turnoff, all the negativity.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if it's scaring away potential viewers, especially people who are new to the community.
And honestly, it's something we see all over the internet, isn't it? This tendency towards outrage and negativity.
Like we always have to be part of a group and pick a side and shout our opinions as loudly as possible.
It's hard to resist sometimes, but these videos encourage us to step back, and ask ourselves, is this what we really want?
Do we want to be surrounded by all this drama and negativity? Or do we want a space that celebrates books and encourages, real intellectual curiosity?
Right. Can't we all just, get get along and talk about books.
Right.
But these videos suggest that might not be so easy.
Why not?
Well, they point out that there's this tendency on Booktube to be super sensitive to any criticism.
It makes sense, though, right? I mean, if you're putting yourself out there online, especially talking about something creative like books, you're going to feel a little defensive.
I get that. But if we're not open to hearing different opinions, even if we disagree with them, then how can we really learn and grow?
Yeah, and let's be real, sometimes criticism can be helpful.
Absolutely. It can help us see things from a new perspective and become more well-rounded readers.
And I think it's important to remember that even negative reviews can be useful.
How so?
Well, they can help us figure out, which books might not be a good fit for us, or they might offer a different take on a book that we hadn't considered before.
That's true. We're not all going to love the same books, and that's okay.
Exactly. Different opinions are what make the book world so interesting, and Booktube is no different.
Right. You've got people from all walks of life with different tastes and perspectives.
And that diversity is what makes it so dynamic and engaging.
You're exposed to all these different viewpoints, and you're challenged to think critically, and you might even discover books that you never would have considered before.
So these videos, even though they're critical of certain aspects of Booktube, they also acknowledge that it's kind of a microcosm of the world, reflecting all the good and bad.
And speaking of bad, let's talk about those ethical issues that come up.
Okay.
Especially when we're dealing with authors who have done or said some pretty problematic things.
This is where things get really tricky.
The videos bring up H.P. Lovecraft again. With his racist views. And they ask this question: is it even possible or ethical to separate the art from the artist in these cases?
And it's tough, right? Because on one hand, you don't want to support bigotry, but on the other hand, you might recognize the artistic value of their work.
It's a dilemma, and I appreciate that the videos don't try to give us easy answers.
Yeah, they encourage us to think for ourselves, which I think is really important.
Absolutely. And that's something I really value about these videos. It's not just about criticizing Booktube, it's about encouraging us to be more critical about everything. The media, we consume the book, we read the ideas we encounter.
It's like they're saying, don't just take our word for it, think for yourself.
Which is what the deep dive is all about, isn't it?
Totally. We don't want to tell you what to think. We just want to give you the information you need to form your own opinions.
We want to empower you to be an active participant in these conversations.
Exactly. So as we start to wrap up this deep dive into Booktube, I'm curious what stands out to you the most. What really got you thinking?
Honestly, it was that reminder about how social dynamics and this pressure to perform can sometimes overshadow genuine intellectual curiosity. It's easy to get caught up in wanting to be liked and fitting in and presenting a certain image online.
It's like we're all performing to some extent, whether we realize it or not.
Right. And that can create this disconnect between who we are online and who we are in real life.
Especially in online communities like Booktube, where it's so easy to hide behind these carefully curated profiles.
It's like we're all trying to fit into these predefined roles, like the bookworm or the critic or the influencer.
And those roles can make it hard to be truly open and vulnerable.
And I think vulnerability is so important for real connection,
Absolutely. If we're afraid to show our true selves, then we miss out on the chance to really connect with others.
It makes me think about how important empathy is in online spaces.
Empathy.
Yeah. If we can see each other as complex human beings with flaws and vulnerabilities, it creates a much more compassionate and understanding environment.
It's essential for bridging those divides and having productive conversations.
Exactly. And that's something we can all work on, both online and offline.
I agree. And before we move on, I think it's worth revisiting that idea of, historical attempts to control what people read.
Oh, yeah, that was a really powerful point.
It reminds us that the freedom we have to read and think and express ourselves, it's not something we should take lightly.
It's a freedom that people have fought hard for, and it's still being challenged in different parts of the world.
It shows us that these conversations about censorship and cancel culture and the role of books, they're not just theoretical,
They have real-world consequences.
They shape our society and our future.
Well said. All right, so let's move into our final thoughts on this deep dive into Booktube. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the problems with Booktube, all the criticisms and controversies, but where do we go from here? What does this mean for the future of the community?
Well, it seems like Booktube is kind of at a crossroads, right? The videos show us both the good and the bad.
Yeah, it's a mixed bag for sure. There's this amazing platform where readers can connect and share their love book, but then you have all this drama and negativity and pressure to fit in.
And it's fascinating how so many of the issues that the videos bring up are really just, reflections of what's happening in society as a whole.
Yeah, like cancel culture and this need to be perfect online. It's just a Booktube thing.
Right, it's everywhere. So it makes you think, is Booktube just a mirror reflecting these trends, or is it actually influencing them?
That's a good question. Does it have that power to change how we view books and authors and reading itself?
I mean, some of these booktubers have huge followings, hundreds of thousands, even millions of subscribers.
Yeah, I mean, a good review from a popular booktuber can make a book a bestseller. And the opposite is true too. If they call for a boycott, it can really hurt an author's career.
So you have this interesting power dynamic, right? Where this community of reviewers and readers has a lot of sway in the literary world.
And that raises some important questions, like, does that affect what authors are willing to write? Do they feel pressured to self-censor or write certain things, please the booktube audience?
Especially because, the videos say booktube can be very critical. People aren't afraid to tear a book apart.
It makes you worry about the impact on authors, especially new authors who are still finding their voice.
But we should also remember that booktube has done a lot of good too.
Oh, definitely. I mean, it's created this space for passionate readers to come together and celebrate their love of books.
It's like a giant virtual book club.
Exactly. You can find new authors, get recommendations, have discussions. It's great.
And for a lot of people, it's more than that. It's a community, a place where they feel like they belong.
That's so important, especially in a world that can feel so isolating.
So even though there are definitely downsides to booktube, it's also brought a lot of good to the book world.
It's complicated, right? Like anything.
Yeah.
It's constantly changing and full of contradictions. But at the end of the day, I think it shows us how powerful storytelling is and how much we crave those connections with other people who love the same things we do.
And as we finish up, I think the biggest takeaway from these videos is to be critical. Think for yourself and never lose that love of reading.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
So to everyone listening, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep reading. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.